Welcome to Christina Speaks. I'm excited to have Lilian Sanchez here to talk about her experience in politics as a young Latina. She is working on the presidential campaign, and I'll let her tell us more about what that's like. So, welcome, Lilian, and thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I've kind of followed you from afar, what you've been doing with this campaign, and I've always been a little bit curious what it takes to be kind of on the inside.
hmm
And so tell us a little bit about how you got involved in politics
hmm
and what you're doing with that now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Sometimes I have to ask myself too, how is it that I got here in the first place? But I think, I didn't grow up in a family that was very political. My family moved to the States, specifically here in Iowa, to Des Moines when I was only 7 years old, from Mexico. And we were an undocumented family. We worried about being able to make it from one week to the next, fearing of deportation every now and then. And a lot of the times, just trying to have my mom put food on the table. She's a single mom, and it's myself and my younger sister, 2 years younger than me. So a lot of the time, our main worries were making sure that as a student, as a young elementary school student, and then growing older, that I would do everything possible to make sure that I got a good education. Because growing up, that was the one thing that my mom would always tell me is make sure you do good in school. That's gonna be what's gonna get us out of our circumstances. And I thought a lot about all of the sacrifices that she had done in order for me to have the life that I had, even beyond all of the work that and shifts that she had to do. And I thought a lot about my grandparents too. I only, again, single mom, I only really know my mom's side of the family. And so my grandparents had to, take care of their family, and my grandpa got a third grade education, and then had to drop out and help support his family. So for me to be able to be in the States and have access to an educational system that could not compare to any other ones that I had had access to, it was already a privilege. And I felt like, I couldn't go and work and be a breadwinner for our family. So the best thing that I could do was be good in school. And the biggest step for me was always trying to figure out how to go to college. And then, I went through my middle school years, went through high school, and it wasn't until we received our legal permanent residency that made it possible for me to then have access to financial aid, and then therefore be able to afford a college education. So it was a series of events that led our family to gain, a form of documentation that then opened up a bunch of other resources that weren't already accessible to us. And through my education, I ended up learning more about, what are all of these systems outside of our power and outside of things that we have access to, that exist, and that oftentimes in many ways marginalized as communities of color, as women. And I started learning more about it and being able to put those experiences into words, being able to talk about, wage theft, and being able to talk about discrimination, and putting words to those experiences. And once I was able to do that and to start understanding how our place in society was one that not many other people were having, some of my friends growing up, their parents were professionals, and never would they have, known that my mother was working 2 to 3 shifts to help support her family. And when I started seeing those stark differences was when I realized that there was something bigger than what I knew, and that the small amount of privilege that I had in, learning the language and getting an education, that I needed to do something to help support the community that had supported my family all along. And that meant, becoming an advocate, figuring out how to find a voice within yourself, realizing that our experiences are just as valuable as the person next to you, and that we have potential and that we have something to offer to this world, even if it's just, our existence. So I think it was a compilation of everything, and really just trying to put all of those puzzle pieces together, and using my strengths and my skill sets to leverage those for, the betterment of the community.
Hmm. So these personal experiences got you thinking about the systemic things that were in place
Mm-hmm.
that were contributing to kind of how the struggles that you were experiencing.
Exactly.
And so then you saw politics as a way to influence that, or
Not originally. Not
Okay.
originally. It was through college that I started learning more about government, and I had always been extremely interested in the law, mainly because, when I was younger, one of the things that frustrated me the most was being able to access justice. My mom and my family and I are survivors of domestic violence, and for her to go through a system that wasn't necessarily in her favor was frustrating, especially as someone who experienced that pain so close. To see my mom have to, face barriers outside of just the language and accessibility, but beyond that, understanding ways that she could use the law, use these systems that are supposed to help, vulnerable communities, and instead see them as major obstacles. And growing up, some of my heroes were people who either were teachers or who somehow used their skill sets to help others. And specifically through my mom's case, it was lawyers, and it was a specific lawyer here in the Des Moines area, Sonia Parras, who I saw not only help my family, but help so many other, women going through some of the same situations. And I saw how she was able to use the law in a way that would advocate for, marginalized communities, for women and for families. And I wanted to do the same thing. So facing issues with domestic violence, but also how that intersected with our immigration status, and knowing that it was, one piece of documentation that made me different from everybody else. There were just so many things that as you're a young person you don't understand, but growing older it has to do with, the legal system. And as I got to college and started learning about laws, and I started learning more about philosophy and really delving into what philosophically world, means, I knew that there was no way to only focus on laws without focusing on the politics of it. And when I started realizing that everything that we do and everything that we are, in one sense or another, is political, whether you're going to a school and you have enough resources, that is political. Whether you are, navigating the world in a car, it's political for you to be able to have a license or not. And so I just found it very difficult for me to focus on this career of being, going to law school and becoming a lawyer, and not also realizing, that there's a bigger system that has to do with politics. And, growing up, there was a lot of kind of mischaracterizations of what politics is, everything that you see from the movies. And I didn't even know what political leanings were growing up, like Democrats, Republicans, Independents, none of that. I had no idea what any of that was. All I knew growing up was, you treat people with respect, and you treat people like their family, and treat others the way you want to be treated. That's about all as much as I knew. And we never really had any sort of table chats that had to do with what was going on in the world or with government, because, my mother didn't have the knowledge, and that wasn't her priority.
Sure.
So it was like I said, a combination of putting a lot of puzzle pieces together, realizing that there were specific avenues that I could use to kind of help support others. And for some reason, I just always became extremely interested in these massive systems and how they work together to either help or, deter people from achieving their goals.
So tell me a little bit about how that experience led you to where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
What is your position specifically, and what is a typical day in the life look like for you?
Yeah. So throughout college, I started getting extremely involved. It was a summer right before I was graduating, probably in my junior year of college, that my grandmother got diagnosed with cervical cancer. And of course, being one of the only members to have a driver's license and to speak English, my family had to rely a lot on me for me to be able to take her to the hospitals and go to her doctor's appointments. So I couldn't hold a full-time job or a part-time job because I had to be extremely flexible in terms of when her appointments were and whatnot. So I needed to find a different way to get involved. At that time, we were experiencing the 2016 election, and I don't even like to say his name, but we had a candidate who absolutely showed everything that I didn't believe in, and I knew was hurting my community and hurting the people that I cared about. So with the little amount of time that I had, in addition to helping my grandmother, I wanted to get involved. So I found a fellowship, and it was, a small student fellowship with a competing candidate. And that's kind of how I started getting involved. I started knocking doors and talking to strangers about this person who I thought was the complete opposite of who I didn't want to be president. And my grandparents would be like, why are you doing this? You're going and putting yourself in danger and knocking on strangers' doors. And there was something in me that was like, I can't vote, but I have to do something in my power to make sure that this person does not become president of the United States. And I saw my grandmother go through the healthcare system, and seeing all of the injustices there, I just knew that I had to do something. And then in college, after that had happened, I decided to run for student body vice president and became the first Latina to be in that position. And to see the difference in conversations that we could have by just having someone with a different experience there, I think opened my eyes out to an entire different opportunity. And I was well connected with two other really powerful Latinas here in the Des Moines area, Talia and Kenya, who were extremely involved in their student governmental bodies. And I just knew that there was something that we needed to do. So since then, it was just one opportunity after another. I had graduated from college, got a fellowship with an international human rights organization, moved to California, did that for a little bit, and then that's how I got connected to Senator Harris's office. I applied for an internship out in DC, didn't think I was going to get it. When I went through the process, I didn't think I was prepared for it. I knew that there were other people who, had more experience than I did. And I interviewed, and it went really well, and they took me as an intern. So then I moved from California to DC, and I got to work as a legislative intern for the senator, where I got to focus and go to hearings on immigration, on women's injustices, on criminal justice reform, and all of these things that, we would grow up learning about, but never actually physically put my hands on it. And then after I interned in her office, I came back to Iowa, worked for a local, candidate here, Rob Sand, who is now serving as the youngest state auditor. And I got pulled into the campaign world, had worked in her office. They knew my work, and Iowa's my home, and Iowa is extremely important here in politics in the state of the country. So the combination of me being familiar with the office, but then also just being an Iowan, like growing up here, helped a lot. And I got reeled into serving as the deputy political director for her campaign.
All right. So really, your experience at University of Iowa kind of opened your eyes to see different ways you got involved politically there, that led to an internship, which now has led to a position. So do you tell me a little bit about how you spend your day? So if somebody were to want to get involved in politics, but they're wondering, what would that look like?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
The thing I like about this job is that every day can be different. I would say the typical day for me is waking up in the morning and first checking through my emails and also through social media to see what has changed. I feel like every day under this current administration, there is a new crisis going on. And so sometimes it's very hard to keep up with what that is. And then, of course, in addition to that, just having so many candidates in a presidential race not only makes it very interesting, but things are moving very, very quickly. So I'll wake up, read my emails, go through Twitter and stay up to date on things. And then I'll go into the office, and the first thing to do is make a to-do list on the things that I need to accomplish for the day. Who are the people that I should be connecting with, and what are the things that I need to do? So what is a deputy political director? It really, for me, the way that I like to describe it is just a fancy form of organizing. My job is to connect with key stakeholders across Iowa. And if you're working in a campaign in a different state, it's about reaching out key constituencies and key community leaders. A lot of the times those community leaders could be your elected officials. So I could be, calling or connecting with a state legislator, a city council member, a school board member, but also any sort of community activist. And my goal is to get either official endorsements from them, but most importantly, to make sure that our communities are being engaged in the democratic process from the beginning, making sure that we're gaining feedback from the communities that we are, in a way, serving, because we're engaging that community, trying to make it, be active so that when we're gone, that community is now engaged. So I just call it a fancy form of organizing. And again, my job is always like continue to build relationships with people, tell them about what we're doing with the campaign, what our candidate stands for, and how that aligns with potentially what they, stand for and the issues that they care about. I would say the most important part, like I said, is feedback. So making sure that we're meeting communities where they're at.
Okay. Is there anything that surprised you when you got into politics outside of school that was so different from academia?
Yeah, I would say everything, because when you're reading a book, you imagine things to be a certain way, and when you're in real life or in the professional world, everybody has some form of agenda. And I feel like whenever we use that phrase, sometimes it can be interpreted as something vicious or bad. But everybody wakes up with an agenda. You wake up with the agenda to either go to work and be able to make a living for your family, or your agenda is to find happiness through your hobbies. And so I think that the hard part in this work is knowing, where people's agendas meet, and how they can start working together for a common goal. So you can be speaking to someone who maybe is running for a local school board and all they care about is making sure they win their election. But we can always talk about, the broader aspect that national politics is national politics, but local politics is local politics. But all at the end of the day, citizens and residents are all being impacted by both. So how can we work together with our different agendas, with our different goals, to make sure that we're benefiting the communities that we're serving at the end of the day? And I think, going back to your initial conversation about why politics and why this, I don't ever really see it as politics because, like I said, I didn't grow up with that framework. I always grew up thinking about it in terms of community service, because our politicians, our representatives, are public leaders, public servants, and they're supposed to be serving our communities. And so when I think about, what this world is, at the end of the day, it's about public leadership and public service. So I think that that's probably something that keeps me grounded. And one thing that I continue to kind of reiterate to myself whenever I do come up with certain situations where maybe goals don't meet or different agendas don't meet.
How has it changed you being in politics? Was there any point where you felt like, oh my gosh, the Lilian of a year ago wouldn't have reacted this way to this situation, but having been in politics, it has informed you differently?
I would say that the way that it's changed me is, that's a good question. I think it's just opened up my mind to, when you're younger and you have ideas of what the world is supposed to look like, you think everything is possible. And I think working in politics makes me realize that growing old doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to be frightening, and we don't have to abandon those dreams. That while there again exists all of these systems, there are ways to change them. And I think I'm lucky because our younger generations are working for that, and we're working beyond just the status quo. We're working to really, again, meet communities where they're at. And I admire Marlu Abarca and Chelsea Chisholm Vargas, because they are women in our community, Latinas, who, regardless of how many people have told them to change, regardless of how many people have told them to be one way or another, they're unapologetic about who they are. And I think that as a younger generation, we are unapologetic about who we are and what we want our world to look like. And so I think that that's changed my mindset, that, again, you know, growing up, the stereotypes of politics were always one thing, but I think that there just is so much potential for us to change what we think politics is, to focusing it on public service leadership. And so that's my goal, you know, while respecting your elders and respecting
Sure.
the trailblazers that come your way. I still think that there's so many ways that we can use those systems for the advantage of all of our community rather than just for a certain group, you know.
So you mentioned a few times that politics wasn't really, wasn't something you grew up with, talking about politics or being active in it. And now that it is, has it changed your family dynamic at all? What does your mom think of it?
I think at first, I mean, and the thing too is recognizing that I was the first person in my family to go to college, and then my sister followed. So when I first went to college, I would pick up on all of this language, both very, very literally, like English language that my mom could not understand, but also terminology that she would be like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean sociological imagination? Like, that's not stuff that we talk about in our everyday life. So I think it affected our family dynamic in the sense that I think my mom felt frustrated that she couldn't experience our growth with us. But that frustration also encouraged her to think about also gaining, getting her GED, which she ended up doing.
Oh, wow.
And then when my sister went to college, she could see, how it was changing her and how public education was really benefiting the way that we saw the world. And she kept, encouraging herself to do the same and became a business owner. So there were ways that she was growing, although not the same as myself and my sister. We were both growing together. Now I think that politics has changed our family dynamic because we're now much more aware about what's going on around us. We're able to sit down and have a conversation. Even if my mom doesn't want to, sometimes she will not stop hearing about, what my sister and I think about our current leadership. And I think that she enjoys being able to not just focus on your everyday struggles, but know that there's something beyond our control that we can every day try and help change. So we voted for the first time together this past, probably 2 weeks ago, the beginning of November. And she was excited to do her research and she was excited to go, a little bit nervous. But the first thing that my mom said when she became a recent U.S. citizen was that she wanted to learn how to become an activist. And of course she told this to my sister, and I wish I would have been there because I wish that I would have told her in so many ways, like, you are an advocate and an activist all on your own. You do not need to give yourself a label that you have already owned your entire lifetime for being the woman that you are.
A single mom who, had limited opportunities, raising two girls who were able to go to college. Yeah, definitely an advocate, fierce leader in her own right. Definitely.
Yeah. Yes. So I like to account a lot of my success and my sister's success to her, because all we knew growing up was a strong woman, and a strong woman who was independent and who was unapologetic and would take leaps of faith, not knowing, what could happen. And I think that is true bravery. I'm definitely much more calculated and I want to make sure things turn out okay, but I always admire her because, her tomorrow was never accounted for. She could have easily, been separated from her children. Right. And to even apply for your citizenship and put yourself out there is scary. So I tip my hats off to, advocates who don't face security every day. Luckily for me, I now have that, and I want to be able to use that to my advantage and to advantage of so many other communities that can't speak up for themselves, because I know what it was like to be in that position.
So you were going through the citizenship process as you were actively working on this campaign. So what did it feel like the first time that you got to vote?
It felt surreal. I don't think that I actually was able to wrap my mind around it because I don't know. I mean, it was just one of those things where it was something that I had looked forward to my entire life. And the fact that I was doing it, it did not feel real. And let alone that I was there with my mom, you know? This woman who, growing up, had no idea what politics was, and we had no idea that even like local elections existed. But I just felt extremely grateful for the opportunity to have, you know, these benefits, but also grateful because we earned it. I mean, just as much as anybody else, like, we are working every single day to try and make sure that, you know, we contribute to our communities, to make sure that we're helping our families and our neighbors. And as grateful as I am, I think it's also important to recognize that we are all doing everything we can to earn, you know, that privilege.
If any, I know, having been born here, I didn't do anything to deserve my citizenship. I was just at the right place at the right time when I was born. I really feel like folks like yourself and like your mom, it's an arduous process. It is by no means easy. It's long, and at times, from what I understand, you don't know what's happening next. And like you said, it takes some bravery to put yourself out there, especially during this administration where you don't know if your work is going to be respected and moved on to the next level. And so I admire anybody who has the bravery to go through that. So congratulations. That is a huge accomplishment, especially nowadays. It's never been easy, but I think it's only become more difficult in the last few years. And I am extremely proud of you that you did that on top of all of the other things that you have been working on and all the other ways that you're contributing. So now that you have accomplished that, you are a voter and a U.S. citizen, where do you see that and your experience with politics? Do you see yourself running? Do you see yourself continuing to back candidates that you believe in? Where will you go from here?
I think for me, it's, again, like education. You know, I am learning every single day as I go. A lot of times being sometimes the youngest person in the room, the only Latina. But what's important to me is that as I learn more about these systems that we don't have access to every single day, that I share that information with people who are either looking at potentially going into that field, and even those who aren't, because again, you know, everybody is affected by policy and by law and by politics, whether you want it or not. And making people aware that they have a role in this and that things don't need to be the way that they are if they don't like it, that there's something that we can do minimally, you know, to change that. So my goal really is, I mean, I still want to go back to school and I still want to pursue law. I think learning about politics, for me, has only enriched my understanding of how these systems work and how we could potentially change them to benefit those communities that need it the most. I don't really see myself staying in politics for too long, and if I do, it's to continue to learn and potentially to help other women and other Latinas see themselves represented and to make sure that our leadership looks like us and understands our background and, you know, is willing to represent us in a way that is appropriate and that it respects us as human beings. So whether it's backing candidates who I think are pushing the needle on issues, who are speaking truth to power, or encouraging people to engage, though it's scary, with these systems.
Well, that's exciting. So you're thinking about law school? Are you thinking about staying local for that? Do you have visions of going out to DC, back to California?
I've always really liked Iowa. I mean, this is home to me. Though it's my second home, I think it's, you know, where it is in my heart. And again, I would not be the person who I am, and my family would not have the resources that we have now had it not been based off of someone, you know, going out of their way to make sure that we were successful. And so the way that I see it, as much as I can do while I'm here, that's the best I can do. And Iowa has a great, has multiple great law schools, because I'm biased because I went to the University of Iowa and they have a great law school and they have a great program, and it's a lot cheaper than other programs across the country. So I would honestly just be lucky if they took me. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's just as important for me to learn here in state as much as it is to go other places. And if anything, my mom, for my sister and I, has always just wanted for us to be able to travel and get to learn about the world, because that was something that she never got to do. Right. She only knew home, and even here in the States, like, all she's done is work. So the fact that my sister right now is in Iceland on a world conference for world leader, which is just so weird for me to say that. So for my mom to be able to vicariously live through the pictures that we're sending her, that's what's important. So I think that that's something that she never got to do that I want to be able to do with her, with the time that I have with her, to make her proud.
So have you already applied for your passports then?
Yeah. I did.
The day one priority?
I accidentally ordered the card and also the passport booklet, so I'm like more than well equipped.
You're covering all your bases. That's exciting. Yeah. Well, I'll be living vicariously through your travels with your mom. I think that would be so cool. Yeah. I'm still working on getting my mom a passport, not because of citizenship issues, but it takes courage, to leave the States, especially if you're older and you have health things that you have to think like, okay, if I went to Iceland, how would I tell the doctor it hurts here? That kind of thing we have to work through. But I love that idea of traveling with your mom, and I look forward to hearing more about that. Maybe you can come back and show us all the stamps on your passports. I wish. Do you know which is going to be your first stamp? Have you already decided?
I don't know. And Christina, just to set the table straight, our first trip together with my sister and I was to Chicago. So when I say travel, we are happy by just going to the state next door.
Hey, travel is travel.
Yeah.
And it's still exciting, and it's still admirable. Lots of adventures still await you wherever you go. It could be Chicago, it could be the other side of the world. It'll still be an adventure. But that's really cool that your sister's in Iceland. Something that I'm always curious about when I hear that young Latinas are doing as much as you have done and are going to do is if you could talk to your younger self, or any young Latina who's maybe wondering what's out there for her. Maybe she isn't documented or doesn't even know her status. What would you tell her about going for her dreams and getting over barriers?
I think that the biggest limitation that we have sometimes is ourselves. And I don't speak about that through my own experience. I speak about it through the experience of my mom. Again, because I think that she's someone who is just so extremely brave and has the ability to say, okay, what's the worst that could happen? Either, I don't get it, or I'm told no, or I fail. And then what? Then there's only the option to continue to get back up and move forward. And I think the bravery in all of that is realizing and being very realistic about the fact that you get to control your perspective and how you see things. And, the worst that could happen is you're told no, or you say no, but if you know deep down inside your own potential, what you're capable of. And even if you don't, sometimes I think most of us don't even know what we're capable of. But to continue to challenge ourselves and know that we are human beings and we can continue to learn, I think, putting down those barriers that we have within ourselves, and then also being kind to ourselves. And I think that that's something that we forget, because we, are worried about what other people think of us, are worried about not making our family proud, are worried about very, serious circumstances that put a lot of urgency on the table. I can't pursue my dreams because I have to be able to help support my family. I think that there's a good balance of being able to do both. And it's about dreaming beyond what you think is doable and acceptable, but also being brave enough to lean on others. There will be people who will want to do everything possible to not help you, but I think there are more people who are going to want to take you under your wing and tell you of all the great things that are out there for you. And that's what I've experienced. People who have taken me under their wing and have said, this is what I did, maybe you can try it. So I think those things, breaking down barriers within yourself, knowing that there's just so much potential that we have, and truly being in the company of people who are going to be there to support you.
Good. So it sounds like you have a great admiration for your mom. You've brought her up several times, which I love. I love when people talk about their families and give us a glimpse to another side of them through their families. Did she ever give you any kind of advice, those, or maybe there was a detour or something that keeps you moving?
Yes.
Was it hard to just pick one?
It's not, yes, because again, like, our moms are always full of wisdom, and you're like, okay, I need to get a notepad out because I need to remember this. It makes me emotional to say it because I love her so much. But the one thing that she always says to me is that cada día hay que sonreír, and it's just about bringing back happiness. Cada día es un buen día para sonreír is what she says. Every day is a good day to smile or laugh. And the reason why that's so important is because regardless of the obstacles or the circumstances that you or anybody is dealing with, there's always a reason, at the end of the day, to move forward and to smile and to bring joy to the world. And I think, in the world that we live in and in the obstacles that we see, it's so easy to be brought down, and it's so easy to feel hopeless, and it's so easy to lose sight of what could potentially be. And again, it goes back to bravery, that despite all of that, she still continues to tell me that every day there's always a reason to smile and to be happy and to cherish, what you have in front of you. So I think that that's, a very powerful thing. When I graduated and you do your typical cap design, like, that was the one thing that I wanted because I wanted her to be there with me. And, the second thing would be every time that you take a step forward, make sure that those around you take a step forward with you. Because we have to be grateful for who we've become, because no one does it for themselves. Like, there is always an entire group of people that help create who you become. And I think that the biggest thing for me is that as individuals, we get to live out the legacy of others by what we've learned from them. And I very much intentionally always try and pick something good out of everybody and get to live that out, in my life, because then it's what they've gifted me, and it's what I get to do to be able to have their story continue in this world. So it's just, things that you pick up growing up, and I'm really grateful that my mom was able to cultivate a lot of those values in both my sister and I, and that we get to feed off of each other, and it continues to kind of keep us grounded in a world that can sometimes be extremely, crazy sometimes.
Very, very much so. Well, it sounds like a really strong team, you, your mom, and your sister. I'd love to meet her one day. I'd be honored to meet her and shake her hand and congratulate her on raising such a dynamic young woman who is changing the world every day. And I love your philosophies about doing this for others and serving. That spirit of service is very strong in you, and that's really admirable. Thank you.
Thank you.
I always like to learn a little bit about the fun side of guests, and so I like to ask them what are their 5 favorite things about Des Moines.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you've spent some time in Iowa City, so if you want to compare the two, you can be as biased or unbiased as you want. But what are 5 things that you love about living in Des Moines?
The number one is that my family is here. And I am really lucky that I've gotten to see Des Moines grow. So there are different parts of, downtown Des Moines, of the suburbs of Des Moines, of La Placita near the East Village. Like, there's so many different parts that I can attest to being a part of my childhood and the way that I was raised here in the state. And I think that that's my favorite part, is to be, to have family here and to be able to call this home. The second has to be related to art. I love the Des Moines Arts Center, and I love the fact that we have a Des Moines Arts Festival every single year. I like it because growing up, my sister and I would volunteer constantly, and we would work the information booths, and we just love to people watch together, and we would spend hours. And
that's
I'm
a good
sure
place for it.
It is a really great place for it. And she and I both just grew up with art around us. So I appreciate that our state and Des Moines specifically cultivates that. The third thing I would say, I really like our state capitol. And it's kind of odd to say that, but, we would live, growing up, my mom, my sister, and I would live only about, 2 or 3 blocks away from it. And I had no idea what the Capitol was. Again, did not grow up in politics. And I would always see the shiny golden dome and right. just knew that it was something special, and just knew that it was only where, some people got to go. And because we were undocumented, we never thought that it would be a place where we should go, because to us it meant danger, and it meant the unknown. And then just about, 7 months ago, a little over that, I was working there, and I got to serve the people of Iowa. And to know that at one point it was this daunting and beautiful but also scary place, to a place where I know that it is a heart of service, and that that's what it can be used for. It's just a constant reminder of how beautiful it is that in a lifetime that change happened, and that it can be, and that change can be possible for others, and reducing the gap between being an average resident of Des Moines to seeing the Capitol as a place where you can call it home, and enjoying the beauty for what it is, for seeing it as a golden dome where, things are possible instead of it being something that's daunting. So I think it's beautiful. I've had, having had worked at the auditor's office, we would get people who, especially those who are retired, who their entire goals are to visit every state of every capital. And they would tell me, I would always say, I'm biased, I think it's beautiful, but they would tell me, we genuinely think it's one of the most beautiful capitals in the country. And to know that it's in our backyard, I just think it's really great. So I would say that that's probably the fourth thing I like about Des Moines. And then the last thing I would say, I just really love our community. And by that I mean the fact that things are changing. There's a lot of tension in maybe how Des Moines should grow. But I think regardless of which direction we take, there's so many of us that, again, are learning to appreciate ourselves for who we are, and learning to bring in our culture. We were at the Latino Heritage Festival this past year, and there was this vibrancy that didn't exist when I was a second grader. And to know that that's growing, and to know that that's who Des Moines is becoming, gives me a lot of hope, and it encourages me, and it's always something that gives me energy to want to make sure that that change is reflected in our leadership, especially here in the state, and especially, with the Latino community, to one day potentially have someone at that Capitol who will then be able to be an advocate for communities like ours.
Well, those are some really varied, but also I can kind of see this thread of service and impact in your 5 favorite things, which really has been kind of a theme of this conversation. Not that we set out to have a theme, that wasn't our goal, but I have seen that throughout, and that's really cool how it has kind of shaped into that. So I'm so glad that we had this chance to talk and catch up and learn a little bit more about you and what that's like. I am not in politics. I never have been, but it's one of those things that I've always thought takes a very unique person, a thick skin, I think, and definitely a mind for service if you're doing it for the right reasons, which I definitely feel that you are. So I'm glad that you are in that field and that there is a Latina out there to give us all a voice, whether we're actively participating or watching from the sidelines. So thank you so much, Lilian.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for this platform to make sure that our stories are recorded, but also highlighted and amplified. So thank you for all that you're doing.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime. And thank you for tuning in to Christina Speaks. I hope you've enjoyed this session with Lilian Sanchez. And for more podcasts, check out Christina Speaks on Primetime Media Group Des Moines.